Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live, where we're talking about the digital revolution that's taking place and the crazy twists and turns that all of our lives in every facet have undertaken over the last several months. Our guest today is one of our monthly digital all-stars, Sean Ammirati, who's a professor at the business school at Carnegie Mellon. He's a venture capitalist, serial entrepreneur, author, and star podcaster in his own right. Sean, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, Bob, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Sean, to continue, your studio there is not just sort of a nice place to work there, but it's reflecting a lot of big things that you're seeing going on, both in your specific world, but also the larger world out there. What's going on?
Yeah, we said, I think the last two episodes, this theme every time that when COVID, as we all are dealing with COVID in our own ways, the goal needs to be reimagining, not just reopening. And I've tried to do that from here, from the studio, in terms of how to reimagine higher ed. And last time I talked about the videos I've done for my courses, right? Taking these hour-long lectures and chunking them up. There are a lot of other schools who are using those lectures now, which is great. I think it's important to have more entrepreneurship education. But another thing that's happened that's interesting is more and more students are just deciding, you know what, like as great as, my freshman year being done over Zoom sounds, and, taking my freshman year from my parents' couch, I think I'm going to just take what's often referred to as a gap year, or just defer my admission for a year, and I'll go back to school next year when hopefully there's a vaccine and this is a little bit more under control and classes can be a little more back to normal. 2 or 3 weeks ago, Forbes reported that 20% of Harvard's freshman class has decided to defer, to take a gap year. And in the article, the author wrote, like, well, what are these students going to do? And I think this is a big question because, I was one of these students, and Bob, you knew me right at the tail end of my undergrad, but not much changed from the beginning to the end. I was one of these students who was in a rush to get through college and get to impact, right? So I graduated in 3.5 years, and if I hadn't done a startup in college, probably would have graduated in 3 years. But I had friends from high school who did go take a gap year, right? They went backpacking through Europe, and they kind of found themselves, or whatever the case may be. And for some of them, I think it was actually probably good. Partially, I think that was good. I think also partially just some life experience outside the community they had grown up was good. But we're in a global pandemic, right? Like there's not a lot of opportunity, and there aren't, frankly, a lot of countries that are hoping to have 18-year-old Americans fly over and visit them right now. And so as I was thinking about it, I thought, what would be magical would be if we could make lemonade out of these lemons and take these students who are making a choice, and each student needs to make their own choice if they want to defer or not. But if you defer, why don't you spend that extra time starting a business? Or even if you're taking your classes online, frankly, like if you've decided to, like, I am going to do those Zoom classes, the reality is there's a lot less social opportunity doing Zoom classes from your parents' couch than there is living in a frat house somewhere. At least rumor has it that there's other activities that go on at those places. And so both those, like, what I want is I want to create a cohort of students who are thinking about themselves as entrepreneurs. So I've launched this program, gapyearentrepreneur.com, which is this community and educational content to take the next 8 months, so from September 15th to May 15th, and actually have them go and launch these businesses. And we've gone through kind of 4 modules around that. And so that's just getting started. It's gotten a lot of early interest, and cautiously optimistic that we can create some interesting businesses. And frankly, even if they don't create an interesting business, to me, you'll be much better prepared to go back to college next year if you spend your gap year as an entrepreneur. So it's been fun. It's yet another way that I'm trying to do exactly what I'm encouraging this audience here and all the startups I work with, as well as the big companies. Don't just think about getting back to what the world was like in February. We need to be continually reimagining what does the future look like here.
So, Sean, you're asking and giving an opportunity for young people to reimagine their futures and reimagine in some ways the opportunities in front of them and the timetable with which they want to pursue that.
That's the goal. That's the goal. And it's like all experiments. We'll see how it works out. But I feel like this is one of those experiments where you really can't lose, because you end up with a successful business. That's awesome. Now you have an asset to build upon. You don't. Well, when you go enter that class in the fall, it won't just be theoretical. You'll have actually walked a mile in the shoes and the concepts that you're talking about in the classes later.
Hey, Sean, when you mentioned that number, it was Harvard, right? 20%
Harvard,
are
yeah.
freshmen deferring a year. Did the article, or do you have a sense of what's typical in a year? Is it 1% or 2%?
Oh, it's much less than that even.
Okay.
I mean, this is unprecedented, for sure. And look, I think different students are going to look at this differently, right? I know, and I can say, I mean, we've been talking about it for the last couple of months, right? There are professors, and I'm one of them, who's worked really hard to make, if you choose to go back to school this fall, to make it a great experience for you. But I also totally understand, like, part of what you get out of college, unfortunately, is not just the educational material, it's the experience, and some of that stuff's just going to be unfortunately really hard to do, in 2020, and as the constraints that we're operating in with this health crisis.
Yeah. So Sean, these, as we said at the top of the show, these unprecedented times and some remarkable things going on. So let's say in the middle of February, I posed two questions to you, or two scenarios, and said, as Sean, which one of these is more likely? One, Sean, we're going to find out in late August that 20% of Harvard freshmen are deferring their freshman year. That's one scenario. The other one is Oracle is going to make a bid to buy TikTok.
I mean, I think in both scenarios, I'd ask you, like, well, what are you smoking? And are you sure it's actually something you're allowed to be consuming? Because they both seem crazy. I mean, this TikTok thing is insane, right? This is just absolutely insane. And let's wind back a little bit for people who haven't been following this, right? So I actually think step one, from Microsoft's perspective, made a ton of sense. The problem is steps 2 and 3 in this story are really hard to wrap your head around, right? So step 1 makes a ton of sense. So TikTok is part of a large Chinese holding company called ByteDance, right? They today, and it's an incredibly popular social media platform, especially for the very young demographic. So it's music, and people are sort of lip syncing and doing dances to music. I know, Bob, that you're a big TikToker, so I suspect that the people should be following you to watch you dance to the different songs.
Yeah, Sean, I don't just give away that stuff for nothing. So it won't be easy to find. I'll just put it that way. But Sean, I got to ask these days, when it seems that infants learn how to say mama, and then they, at the same time or before, they learn how to swipe a screen. Yep. So when you talk about TikTok being popular among a very young demographic, what is that age group?
So I mean, I can tell you, I have an 8 and 9-year-old, and we don't let them have a TikTok account, but they are on my wife's account hours a day, sometimes, watching these choreographed dances and things like that. Especially my daughter, like, she just loves the, like, choreographed dance routines to music, and it's this very sort of long tail content. And like all social media platforms, there's a lot of moderation questions. There's a hornet's nest of problems there. However, step 1 of this saga that we're going to talk about makes a ton of sense. Microsoft has a long history of making small minority investments in these emerging computing social platforms to try to find technology synergy between those companies and Microsoft, right? So famously, at a point in time, Facebook received a large investment from Microsoft. So Microsoft dusts off, and we think we've talked about this before, they dust off that playbook and they say, hey, why don't we make an investment in the company, a minority, small, like, order of magnitude $1 billion, but relatively small for the type of scale you're talking about here. And part of it was, you'll move your servers from the Google Cloud servers to Azure. Again, like at this point, I think everything I've said makes sense. And if you look at the Facebook story, would have been a really kind of obvious thing. And frankly, like if it had stopped there, I think you and I would have been having an episode where we talk about how smart Satya is to dust off the playbook that they've done many times before. But here's where the psychology of deals, and having been involved in a bunch of these deals, like here's where the psychology of these deals gets a little crazy, right? From my perspective, at least. So there become a bunch of concerns around foreign investment, and I won't sort of put your audience to sleep around this, but there is a bunch of regulatory oversight that the government has around foreign investments. A lot of the TikTok assets were bought through an entity called Musical.ly. It's kind of not that relevant, but I think the quick thumbnail on this is the government starts to get involved. And then once the government starts to get involved, Trump himself jumps into the fray on that. And what I would just say is, like, all of a sudden it becomes important for TikTok to think about not just a small minority investment, but finding a way to find American ownership. Again, these things happen. I have some opinions on them. It's sort of neither here nor there. But where this story gets crazy is steps 2 and 3. So Microsoft somehow pivots from, oh, we should put a small amount of money in to get them running on top of Azure, to maybe we should buy the whole thing. And now we've gone from like $1 billion to the reporting in the New York Times is a range of 20 to 50 billion. And let me just tell you, any of those numbers are insane. Like this is not a good move for Microsoft, and we can talk about that in a minute. But then, as if that's not crazy enough, Larry Ellison swoops in, who to also apparently jump into the fray as potential acquirers, because every SQL Server administrator is also watching choreographed dance videos at night. Like there is no doubt that the audience overlap there is amazing. I mean, this is crazy.
We're going to come back to that in just a second, but I just want to be sure to offer a word from our sponsor, BMC. In a world that's changing faster than ever before, the biggest challenge for businesses is creating fabulous customer experiences. That objective requires actionable insights and real-time agility from one end of your business to the other. At BMC, they call this the autonomous digital enterprise, and they've put together a set of solutions to help you anticipate what's coming, adjust accordingly, and acknowledge those changes from end to end. To start your journey to the autonomous digital enterprise, visit bmc.com/ADE.
A Disney makes a ton of sense, right? Now, Disney would need to think through the content moderation piece of this. A Twitter makes a ton of sense, although I think it would be more like TikTok buying Twitter than Twitter buying TikTok if that happens. But that makes a ton of sense. The reality is, I think Facebook, Google, Apple, they're all boxed out because of anti-competitive things, which is fine. There's probably synergies there that make sense, but it would never get through. But why enterprise tech companies are thinking they should get in broadcast social media platforms, because this isn't even like LinkedIn makes sense for Microsoft. It's a professional social network. And you could even say, oh, we want to go to another human-to-human social network and kind of continue to build that business out. That wouldn't be the strategy I'd advise, but you can think about that. But this is closer to, frankly, buying a YouTube than it is buying a LinkedIn, right? This is much more of a broadcast publishing and people consuming that content type of social platform. And I do not understand why these enterprise tech companies are thinking about this at all. It makes no sense to me. And I just fear that what's happened here, and this happens in deals, is you get kind of partially committed to them, and then the deals change, and instead of making the decision that frankly most of the time in hindsight is the right decision, right? That you sort of walk away because the original deal that got you excited is no longer in scope. I guarantee you the original pitch inside Microsoft was like, how valuable would it be to have TikTok as an Azure marquee customer, tons of learning back and forth. And frankly, like if Oracle wants to compete for that business, that is interesting. I think that there's some logic there. But buying a social media platform like this, I mean, we talked about this a little bit, kind of previewing it last time. You had, the CEOs of Apple, Facebook, Google, and Amazon going to Washington. I mean, was Satya just jealous that he wasn't invited to the hearing? Like, I literally cannot come up with a reason why Microsoft would want to do this deal. And if Microsoft's crazy, Oracle is like next level crazy. Like they get crazier, not less crazy. It's a wild time in 2020 for sure.
Well, Sean, it's fascinating speculations there on a number of fronts. And I worked at Oracle for 4.5 years. I followed the company very closely before that, and since then, I'm as puzzled as you are. And the only thing that and that I can sort of offer up as a potential idea here, and I will admit up front, it's quite flimsy, is part of Larry Ellison's operating philosophy for a while, and he truly believes this. It's not just a slogan, where he says, if people aren't calling you crazy on a regular basis, you're not pushing out on the boundaries far enough. But I think that goes for, like when they bought Sun, what are you getting into the hardware?
Right.
Everybody's getting out. What are you getting into it for? When it's turned out to be, quite an extraordinary investment for them. So even if I follow that sort of train, is the pattern then to buy customers, right? Because ultimately, like you said, you want TikTok to be the platform. So if that is true, then would we start to see a spate of, cloud infrastructure providers buying their customers, for whatever field they're in? So anyway, I can't quite figure, but
if you're going to do that, you don't start
record
in media,
Yeah.
right? I personally wouldn't advocate that kind of vertical integration for the infrastructure providers in general. But man, you could give me a dozen industries and you could probably pick the other 11, and I'm still pretty sure, social media, and it's specifically this sort of video broadcasting piece of social media, which it's got all kinds of challenges around it in 2020. Like that's just not a winning place for these guys to start.
And Sean, you can keep on asking me to reveal, where my TikTok videos are, and I'm not ready to talk about that. Okay, so we'll let that go. Sean, the other thing is, rightly or wrongly, there is at least, from that I've seen in many, many places, some concerns that one of the things that TikTok is doing is sort of that Trojan horse in there to get, data about children or families or something like that. Right now, you could say that's nonsense. Everybody does it, or nobody does it, or that's overblown. But if, some of the more logical acquiring companies that you mentioned would have, they'd have to do their due diligence, take care of all that, get into it. But when you get off into these other companies where it really is, what's the word, orthogonal to their true purpose, to their strategy, then why, just as one more like head scratcher reason, why do you get into something like this when it's a puzzler though? And I wonder, has the world gone so crazy here in the middle of 2020 that we have to start, are we pushing the boundaries of what crazy enough is?
I don't know. I mean, this just doesn't make sense to me. And rather than just be critical, let me try to generalize some strategic business principles I think you can pull out of this, as maybe to kind of wrap this thread up. Like, one really good first principle question I think to ask is, who's my customer, right? And what are the problems he or she has? Like you rarely, if you go to that kind of just fundamental question, you rarely end up, you know, you can end up with some really crazy things. Like people perceive you to be crazy, to your Larry Ellison comment, right? So Oracle buying Sun. There are a lot of people who thought that was brilliant. A lot of people, many more who thought that was insane, right? But it was still the same general customer segment, right? Um, I think that the things you've seen Microsoft do that we've given tons and tons of praise to over the last year, these deep partnerships with these different industry partners, whether it's in the pharmaceutical space or the automotive space or the retail grocery space, right? That's going to your customer, figuring out what are the things that are keeping him or her up at night and solving problems for them. And sort of from a first principles business perspective, I think that's a great way to approach these kind of strategic challenges, right? When we're talking about Oracle buying TikTok, like depending on how you look at the TikTok platform, your customers are either advertisers, right? Which I don't think that's a win for Oracle. Or your customers are, you know, preteen and young teen children. And I actually think, and this is one of the challenges with those types of business model, the real customer is the advertiser, right? Really, the reality, if you were to put it like on a business model canvas, those audiences of consumers, they're really a key resource, or they're really the product, not the customer. But that's sort of neither here nor there. But either of those stakeholders, if you were to say that, there's very minimal overlap with the rest of Oracle's business. And even and I think this is actually potentially the fatal flaw inside Microsoft, for what it's worth. I think Microsoft is saying, like, well, we've got Minecraft, we've got Xbox, we know how to reach that audience. Yes, you do, in a very, very different way, though. Remember, that's now making this mistake that people sometimes make, which is, oh, you know, Facebook's customers are Facebook users, or Google's, now I'm not talking about Google Cloud, I'm talking about Google, the search engine. Google's customers are all the world searching web. No, we are their product, not their customer. If you were on the business model canvas, we're sort of the back half, not the front half. I don't think, I think Oracle is crazier than Microsoft, but they're both crazy. And I think it's easy to get, when you get into these deals and you got a lot of bankers circling, and from the reporting again in the New York Times, there were a bunch of different venture firms, General Atlantic and Sequoia. You got a bunch of smart people kind of ideating in a conference room together, and smart people can get super creative, right? And they can tell each other how brilliant that creativity is. And, you know, one of the things that served me well in my career in those settings is to ask some questions that are kind of simple, like, well, you know, let's answer this in language that our parents or our grandparents could understand. Who's our customer? What problem does he or she have? And how do we solve it? And you can't use any buzzwords, because your grandma or mother she doesn't know, you know, the words that we've tossed around for the last 45 minutes. I mean, sometimes those first principles help. And so, you know, if we were kind of generalizing this for many people listening to this, I think for your businesses, as you're thinking about reimagining and not just reopening your businesses, come back to this question of who's your customer, what problem does he or she have, and how do I solve it? And I think it's a helpful grounding exercise. And you know, no one's called me from Oracle or Microsoft, but if they did, my advice to them would be, let's start there. Now, through that lens, help me understand how bolting this, again, rumor has it, 20 to 50 billion with a B dollar asset on top of this is actually going to help you serve that purpose in a better way.
Yeah, Sean, I think just before you came on, I saw a headline that said that Oracle had made a $20 billion all cash offer. So in that range. Sean, before you go, let me go back to those two scenarios I posed you back in February, the pre-COVID world. I'm going to add a third one in here. So it's back in February, and I say, Sean, it's starting next month in March, we're going to go through a global pandemic that's going to extend certainly until the end of August. And when Salesforce releases its earnings in late August, day or two later, their stock price is going to go up $50 billion in a day. So against, those other couple scenarios, where does that one stand?
I actually, so you'd have to have said there's some catalyst. It doesn't have to be a global pandemic, but I think what Salesforce has done incredibly well, and we've talked about this kind of throughout the last few Cloud Wars episodes you and I have recorded together. So for people who've been listening carefully, the earnings exceeding expectations should not have been that surprising to them. What they've done really well is they've taken this crisis, and I think to give credit to that management team, they obviously would prefer to not be in a crisis, right? Yep. But they've taken this crisis and they've said, okay, this is a catalyst to drive towards more cloud adoption, more digital transformation, all the sort of buzzwords that we've been talking about for years here. And they've been taking orders while they've been doing that. At the same time, they've also been doing all the right things to pivot the business to support and prepare the economy for the kinds of things that they're needing that it will need, like the work.com. So for what it's worth, I don't think that stock jump was quite as surprising because they've been doing the right thing, right? They've been doing exactly what we were saying, focusing on who their customers are, what problem do they have, and frankly, this problem that sort of making modern workers more efficient using software tools in this work from home, work remote, distributed workforce, like that's a much bigger problem inside all of Salesforce customers today than it was in February. And so it's amazing. Now, when you start thinking about what the scale of that stock appreciation means, it's crazy, right? I would have told you 3 or 4 years ago, Oracle is going to buy Salesforce. That's how Larry's going to deal with passing the baton. Well, there's a new wrinkle in that. If you look at the relative market caps, there's a different big brother now, I guess we'll put it that way. So it's fascinating for sure.
There is. All right. And Sean, real quick before you go, in the big software company world now, it's Salesforce at 245 billion, SAP 201, and Oracle 176.
That's really amazing.
And Salesforce went up that 50. So approximately, Sean, just, the Salesforce valuation right now is as big as IBM and two of the superstars in, the broad category that Salesforce is in, ServiceNow and Workday. So, those three. And so, all right.
Cumulatively, it's bigger than all three of those combined, correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes. So, Sean, when you come back next month, we might have 3 crazier things than this to imagine, but I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure, but we'll see. Sean, it's terrific. Good to see you. Really love what you're doing there. You're set up in this reimagination of not only what you do and how you do it, but the physical environment which you do it. I've heard from some other people, I need to get out of the, old mindset, not just in what I'm doing, but how I do it, and reshape your local environment to help drive the capability to reimagine the bigger outside environment.
That's right. Well, thanks, Bob, and always fun to come on Cloud Wars and chat with you.
All right, my friend. Thank you, Sean. Folks, thanks to all of you for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Enjoy these last few days of the summer season, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here soon.